We weren't supposed to be here. Not in this part of the world. Not in this stretch of the Pacific where no maps dared to claim ownership. Yet, here we were, adrift above something ancient, something that should have remained hidden. The research vessel, Sentinel bobbed gently atop the rolling black water, its floodlights cutting through the mist that clung to the surface like a living thing. The sky was starless, a dome of featureless void stretching in all directions. No moon, no horizon, just an endless, empty expanse. I gripped the cold steel railing and exhaled, watching my breath dissolve into the air. Below us, our submersibles had detected an impossible structure, a massive, temple-like formation buried beneath centuries of silt. It had no known origin, no recorded history. A structure built by no civilization we knew. Dr. Evelyn Cartwright, the expedition's lead archaeologist, stood beside me, her gloved fingers wrapped around a tablet displaying grainy sonar scans. "It doesn't match anything," she murmured, shaking her head. "Not a ruin, not a shipwreck. The edges are too precise. It's almost engineered." Her voice was tight, unreadable. She was brilliant, sharp as a scalpel, but there was something else in her expression tonight. A tension she was trying to bury beneath scientific detachment. Captain Harris approached, his heavy boots echoing against the deck. He was a man of hard edges, a retired Navy officer who had seen more than he cared to remember. He handed me a radio. "Sub's ready. You and O'Neill are going down first. Cartwright follows with Vasquez and Rourke once you confirm it's safe." Safe. The word tasted like a lie. I nodded, though something inside me resisted. There was an instinct I had learned to trust over the years, a quiet alarm that buzzed in the back of my skull when things felt wrong. It was screaming now, but protocol was protocol. O'Neill was already in the descent chamber, adjusting his helmet. He was a seasoned diver, a man who had seen the deepest trenches on Earth, but there was something in his eyes tonight, something uncertain. "You ready for this?" he asked, checking the oxygen mixture in my suit. Would it matter if I wasn't? His chuckle was dry. Probably not. We boarded the submersible, a sleek, reinforced pod designed for deep exploration. As the hatch sealed, the outside world became a distant memory, the only sounds now the hum of the engines and our own measured breathing. The descent began. Water swallowed us whole, light fading as we slipped beneath the surface. The floodlights pierced the darkness, illuminating swirls of disturbed silt drifting in slow spirals. Then, far below, it came into view. The temple was not ruined. It was intact, a sprawling monolith of black stone, its surface unmarred by time or the crushing weight of the deep. It stretched out in a vast, intricate pattern, too symmetrical, too precise. And at its center, an entrance, a massive, open doorway beckoning. O'Neill muttered something under his breath. I didn't ask him to repeat it. We guided the sub toward the entrance, the beams from our lights bending strangely, like they were being absorbed by the walls rather than reflected. My stomach tightened. The architecture made no sense, too smooth, as if the stone had been poured rather than carved. "Cartwright, you seeing this?" I asked through the comms. Her voice crackled through the static. "I see it, and I don't like it." Neither did I. The readings on my monitor were fluctuating. Something about the electromagnetic field down here was wrong. Anomalous spikes, rapid distortions. O'Neill tapped the controls. "We're losing stability. The sub's instruments are." The lights flickered. Then, for a single impossible moment, everything went dark. Not just the sub's lights. The entire ocean. A blackness so complete it felt like the world had ceased to exist. The pressure around us deepened, a suffocating weight pressing against my skull. Then, just as suddenly, the lights snapped back on. O'Neill sucked in a sharp breath. His hands were white-knuckled on the controls. "Did you feel that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded slowly, like something was watching. The entrance loomed before us, vast and silent. Waiting. Cartwright's voice came through again, tighter this time. "You need to decide now. If you go in, we might lose direct comms. The interference is..." "We're going in," I said before I could stop myself. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the temple calling us. O'Neill guided the sub forward, into the yawning abyss of the entrance. As soon as we crossed the threshold, the pressure changed. The hum of the ocean shifted, became something else, a low vibration, deep and constant. The walls were smooth, featureless, and dry. That shouldn't have been possible. We proceeded slowly, the sub's searchlights sweeping across the interior. It was massive, far larger inside than the exterior suggested. There were no signs of collapse, no biological growth. It was as if the place had been sealed away from time itself. Then O'Neill whispered, "There's something ahead. A staircase. Not stone. Metal." It spiraled downward, into a space our floodlights couldn't reach. The steps were pristine, without corrosion or wear. I felt it again, that quiet alarm in my skull. Something in this place was awake. Then the radio crackled with a burst of static, an unnatural clicking sound interlaced with something else. A voice, not one of ours. "Hello." O'Neill and I locked eyes. The voice had come from inside the sub, from behind us. I turned slowly, pulse hammering, but there was nothing there. Just the steel walls of the cockpit, the dim glow of instrument panels. O'Neill's breathing had gone shallow. We're not alone in here. The static hissed again, closer this time. Then the floodlights flickered, and for a fraction of a second, in that brief sliver of darkness, I saw it. A reflection on the glass. Not mine. Something else. Watching. The lights returned. The reflection was gone. The clicking in the radio stopped. But something had changed. The sub felt wrong now. Smaller. Like something else was in here with us. Cartwright's voice came through, distant and distorted. "Do you copy? We lost your signal for a full minute. What happened down there?" I swallowed hard. I think we just found the entrance. And I wasn't sure if we were supposed to leave. O'Neill's hands were trembling on the controls. He didn't acknowledge it, but I saw the tightness in his knuckles, the shallow rise and fall of his breath. Whatever we had just witnessed, or thought we had witnessed, had rattled him. It had rattled me. I forced my voice into something steady as I spoke into the comm. "Cartwright, we're proceeding inside. Keep the line open." The silence on the other end stretched longer than it should have. Then, finally, her voice came through, thin and clipped. "Acknowledged. Be careful." As if that were an option. The sub drifted deeper. The beams of our floodlights sweeping over a corridor impossibly large, stretching beyond the range of our instruments. The smooth black walls swallowed the light, diffusing it into nothingness. No signs of age. No marine growth. It felt less like an ancient ruin and more like something that had been waiting. O'Neill exhaled sharply. "Look at that." The walls were moving. Not physically shifting, but something about the light. It wasn't behaving correctly. The reflections wavered, twisting in ways that defied logic. Like the walls were only pretending to be solid. Then movement. Not a trick of the light. Something else. A shape, slipping just beyond the edge of the floodlights. I stiffened. "Did you see that?" O'Neill swallowed hard. "I don't know what I saw." The radio crackled again, another burst of clicking static. Then, a voice, layered beneath the noise, distant and warped. "Help me." O'Neill's eyes darted to me. "Tell me that was you." I shook my head. The sound had come from inside the sub. I turned slowly, pulse pounding, scanning the cramped space behind us. The equipment flickered. Shadows bent at strange angles. But there was nothing there. Then, Cartwright's voice, suddenly sharp through the comm. "You need to get out of there." A beat of silence. Then, a scream from above. "Vasquez." O'Neill reacted first, yanking the controls, pulling the sub into a sharp ascent. The walls seemed to pull away, stretching into the void as if they had no true boundaries. "Sentinel, report." I barked into the radio. No response. Just ragged breathing, something scraping against metal. Then, Cartwright, her voice tight and controlled. "Vasquez is gone." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean, gone?" She hesitated. He was standing near the dive equipment. The lights flickered, and when they came back on, he was just gone. No splash, no sound. Just gone. I met O'Neill's gaze. He shook his head, jaw clenched. No way in hell that's possible. But we both knew by now, impossible didn't mean a damn thing down here. A sudden impact rocked the sub, hard enough that alarms screeched through the cockpit. O'Neill swore, gripping the controls as the craft lurched violently to one side. Something had hit us, or grabbed us. I turned to the viewport, and, for a fraction of a second, I saw it. A shape, human but not. A distorted figure drifting in the blackness, its limbs too long, its joints bending in the wrong directions. It had no face, only a smooth, featureless void where its eyes should have been. It raised one elongated hand, a perfect mimicry of Vasquez's diving glove. Then it was gone. The sub jerked free as if something had let go. O'Neill's breathing was ragged. "Tell me you saw that." I gripped the radio, my voice barely above a whisper. "Cartwright, Vasquez is still here." The silence that followed was worse than anything. O'Neill pulled us upward, faster now, pushing the sub's thrusters to their limit. The temple shrank beneath us, disappearing into the abyss. The higher we climbed, the more normal the water felt, as if we were emerging from somewhere we were never meant to be. The Sentinel came into view, its floodlights cutting through the mist above. Relief tightened my chest. Then, a shadow moved on the deck. Something was standing there, motionless, waiting for us. I grabbed the radio. "Cartwright, who the hell is on deck?" No response. O'Neill didn't wait. He docked the sub, the clamps sealing into place. The moment the hatch hissed open, I climbed out and froze. The deck was empty. No figures. No shadows. Nothing. But something was wrong. The air felt thick, charged with static. A pressure that pressed against my skull. O'Neill pulled himself up beside me. "Where the hell is everyone?" A soft sound drifted through the mist. Dripping. I turned. A trail of wet footprints led from the dive equipment toward the control room. The prints were too large, too irregular, like whoever made them wasn't entirely human. I exchanged a glance with O'Neill. Neither of us spoke. We followed. The control room door was slightly ajar. The overhead lights flickered. Inside, Cartwright stood alone. Her back was to us, her head tilted slightly to one side. Something was wrong with her shadow. It wasn't moving in sync with her. I took a slow step forward. "Dr. Cartwright?" She didn't turn immediately. When she finally did, her movements were a fraction too slow, as if she were learning how to imitate the motion. Her expression was calm, unreadable. "We need to leave." O'Neill shifted beside me. "What happened?" Cartwright's lips parted, but her voice, it wasn't quite hers. There was a second voice beneath it, layered and wrong. "Vasquez went outside." I swallowed. Outside where? Her head tilted. The ocean. My blood ran cold. O'Neill took a slow step back. "That's not possible." Cartwright blinked. Too slow. Too deliberate. He said we should follow. I took a sharp breath. "Where is the captain?" Her expression didn't change. "He's already with Vasquez." Behind me, O'Neill whispered, "We need to go." Then Cartwright smiled, and I knew, with absolute certainty, she wasn't Cartwright anymore. The overhead lights flickered once, and when they returned, Cartwright was gone. The control room was empty. The only sign she had ever been there. A single, wet footprint on the floor. The comms crackled. Then, in Cartwright's voice, distorted and wrong, "We should follow." And then, nothing. The ship was silent, and we were completely alone. O'Neill moved first. I barely registered the motion before he grabbed my arm and yanked me back through the door. I didn't resist. The air inside the control room felt thinner, like whatever had been wearing Cartwright's voice had sucked the oxygen out of it. The deck was empty. The ship rocked gently, oblivious to the horror that had taken root in its steel bones. The wet footprints had already begun to dry, but the air still carried the thick, unnatural scent of salt water and something else. Something old. We weren't alone. "We need to go," O'Neill whispered. He wasn't the kind of man to rattle easily, but his face was bloodless, his breaths quick and shallow. "Where?" My voice was barely a breath. "The Sentinel is the only way back. If we leave, we're trapped out here." He turned toward me, eyes wide, wild. "We're already trapped." I couldn't argue. A low creak reverberated through the ship's hull, like something immense shifting beneath the water. The Sentinel was sinking, inch by inch, though the sea was calm. I tried the radio. "Sentinel, come in." Nothing. Just dead air. The same emptiness Vasquez had disappeared into. The same black abyss Cartwright had stepped into without a second thought. A voice rasped from the speakers, hers. "You should follow." The same words. The same wrong cadence, like something was learning how to mimic her but hadn't quite figured out how human speech was supposed to work. O'Neill exhaled through his nose. "We can't stay up here." I swallowed. He was right. If whatever had taken Cartwright was still on the ship, we had nowhere to run. And if the Sentinel was sinking, there was only one place to go. "Back down." I turned to O'Neill, expecting resistance, but he only nodded once, jaw tight. The temple. It wasn't a suggestion. It was inevitable. The descent felt different this time. The first time we had been explorers. Cautious. Controlled. This time, the sub plunged into the abyss like it had been called home. O'Neill kept his hands steady on the controls, though his eyes kept darting to the instruments, which flickered erratically. The pressure readings were inconsistent, the depth gauge twitching between numbers that made no sense. Cartwright's voice had stopped. The silence was worse. Then movement. Not outside. Inside the sub. The cockpit lights flickered, and for half a breath I saw something in the reflection of the glass. A third shape behind us. The lights snapped back. O'Neill's hand twitched toward his belt, where a diving knife was strapped. "Did you?" "Yeah." Neither of us turned around. The sub's floodlights carved through the deep, revealing the temple's open maw ahead, waiting for us. There was no hesitation this time. No cautious sweep of the perimeter. We entered the temple, and the walls swallowed us whole. The inside had changed. The first time, the temple had been an empty shell, an abandoned structure, impossibly preserved. Now it was alive. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting with a slow, rhythmic pulse. A low vibration filled the sub's hull, deeper than sound, a hum that sank into my bones. The staircase, the one we had seen before, was waiting. A single, spiraling descent into the abyss. O'Neill's throat bobbed. "You sure about this?" "No." But we didn't stop. The sub couldn't go further. We had no choice. We suited up, double-checked our oxygen supply, and stepped out onto the impossible metal steps. They were cold. Colder than they should have been. The kind of cold that steals warmth rather than lacks it. O'Neill's breath came sharp through the comms. The walls. I turned. The walls weren't walls anymore. They were mirrors. Not perfectly reflective. Their surfaces were distorted, fluid, like I was staring into a warped version of myself. The air tightened in my throat. The reflection wasn't mimicking me perfectly. My arms were at my sides, but in the mirror, my reflection's hands were reaching for me. I stumbled back. O'Neill caught my shoulder, but his gaze was locked on his own reflection. It was smiling. O'Neill wasn't. I grabbed his arm. "Keep moving." He didn't argue. We descended. The staircase ended at a doorway carved into the stone. A frame of metal, smooth and black, shimmering like oil on water. Beyond it, nothing. A pit of pure darkness. A void. The same pit from the engravings. O'Neill exhaled, his breath fogging against the inside of his helmet. "I don't like this." I didn't either, but we had come too far. There was something down here, something that had taken Vasquez, Cartwright, the captain, and we were running out of time. I stepped forward. My boots met solid ground, though there was nothing but blackness beneath me. O'Neill followed. The door sealed behind us. At first, there was only darkness. Then whispers. Not words. Something deeper. Concepts. O'Neill stiffened beside me. "Do you hear that?" I didn't answer, because it wasn't sound. It was understanding. A flood of something that wasn't my own thoughts filling my head. We weren't alone. Shapes shifted in the dark. Not creatures. Echoes. Figures moved through the void, their forms flickering like shadows cast by an unseen light. Some wore suits like ours. Others were wrong. Bent limbs. Twisted spines. Mouths where there shouldn't be mouths. O'Neill made a strangled sound. "I see Vasquez." I turned. Vasquez stood a few feet away, his suit pristine, his visor dark. He wasn't moving, not breathing, not blinking, just waiting. Then, he tilted his head. A slow, unnatural motion, like a puppet learning how to mimic something human. The whispers grew louder. And then Vasquez spoke. "You were never supposed to come back." The shadows around him twisted, shifting into dozens of versions of himself. Some of them missing faces, others splitting apart at impossible angles. O'Neill stumbled back. "Jesus Christ." Vasquez took a step forward, and his face changed. It was mine now, a perfect copy, except for the eyes. The eyes were empty. I stepped back, but the blackness behind me wasn't solid anymore. The space was collapsing, the void itself shifting around us. The whispers turned into something else, laughter, not amused, hungry. O'Neill grabbed my arm. "We have to go." The laughter surged, a tidal wave of sound without a source, as Vasquez, or the thing wearing his shape, took another step. I turned and ran. We didn't stop running until the staircase returned. The walls were no longer mirrors. They were pulsing, shifting between smooth stone and something that almost had skin. I risked a glance back. The void was closing. The figures within it, Vasquez, Cartwright, the captain, all of them were watching us. But none of them followed. We reached the sub and sealed the hatch. O'Neill's hands were shaking. That wasn't them. That he swallowed. That was never them. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure I was me anymore either. The sub began to rise. The Sentinel was waiting, and I wasn't sure if we were going back to the ship, or if we had never left. The sub ascended, but something was wrong. The Sentinel should have been waiting for us, a familiar silhouette against the void of the ocean. Instead, the water above was thick, heavy, too still. I checked the depth gauge. It was unreadable, fluctuating wildly, as if the instruments couldn't agree on where we were. O'Neill gripped the controls tighter, his breaths slow, measured. "We should have surfaced by now," he muttered. I didn't respond, because the truth was sinking in. We weren't going back. We had never been meant to leave. The cockpit lights flickered again. For a split second, the reflection of the sub's interior didn't match our movements. The console was dark, the seats empty, as if we had never been inside at all. Then, impact. The sub jerked violently, metal groaning as if the pressure had suddenly tripled. O'Neill cursed, fighting the controls. And then I saw it. Through the viewport, a shape emerged from the blackness. The Sentinel, but wrong. It floated, suspended in the water like a drowned corpse, its hull covered in a thin layer of something organic, pulsing faintly. The floodlights were on, but the windows were dark. No movement, no signs of life. And then Cartwright stepped into view. She stood on the deck, motionless, staring down at us, waiting. I felt a sharp pressure behind my eyes, a deep, thrumming pulse that wasn't sound but understanding. "That's not Cartwright," O'Neill said. His voice was flat, dead. I already knew. Cartwright lifted her hand, palm out, fingers spread. A silent command. Something moved in the water around the Sentinel. Shapes unfolding, shifting. More figures standing on the deck. Vasquez, the captain. More than just them. People we had never seen before. All watching. Then, the sub's alarms blared. Something latched onto us. The weight was unbearable, pulling us back down toward the temple, toward the impossible abyss. O'Neill fought against it, but I already knew the truth. This was never an expedition. It was a retrieval. The temple had never been lost. It had been waiting, and now it was bringing us home. I felt it then, the whispers pressing into my skull, familiar now, like something pulling apart my thoughts and putting them back together wrong. "You were never supposed to leave." O'Neill let out a strangled noise, jerking against the restraints, eyes wide. "I see myself." I turned to him. His pupils were blown wide, his body trembling. His reflection in the viewport was smiling. I wasn't, and neither was he. I felt something shift behind me. Something was inside the sub. A shadow stretched across the cockpit. Not O'Neill's. Not mine. Then a voice, rasping and layered, my own voice. We never left. The lights went out. Darkness. Then, a gasp. My own breath. I was standing. The air was still, thick with salt and something metallic. I turned, heart pounding, and realized I was back on the deck of the Sentinel. O'Neill was beside me, wide-eyed, his hands shaking. The sub was gone. No signs of impact, no wreckage. Just the ship, rocking gently on the waves, as if nothing had happened. I exhaled shakily. Are we? The words died in my throat. The wet footprints were still there, leading from the dive equipment toward the control room, exactly as they had before. O'Neill followed my gaze. No, he whispered. No, no, no. The comms crackled to life. Cartwright's voice. Perfect. Clear. We need to leave. I turned toward the control room. The door was ajar, and there, standing exactly where she had been before, was Cartwright. The same tilt of her head, the same unreadable expression. O'Neill grabbed my arm. This is wrong. This is... Cartwright's lips moved. Her voice, not quite hers. Vasquez went outside. I couldn't breathe. O'Neill took a step back. We did this already. This already happened. Cartwright's head tilted further, her body just slightly too stiff, too unnatural. The captain is with him now. O'Neill turned to me, wild panic in his eyes. We have to go. But I wasn't sure if there was anywhere left to go, because the Sentinel wasn't real. Not anymore. We were still in the temple. We had never left. The whisper was inside my skull again, pressing against the fragile edges of my thoughts. You were never supposed to leave. I turned slowly, and my stomach dropped. O'Neill was staring at me, but his reflection in the window wasn't. It was staring at me, smiling. Cartwright took a slow step forward. O'Neill's voice came out hoarse. This isn't real. But reality didn't mean anything anymore. I backed away, toward the railing, the mist swallowing the edges of the ship. The ocean stretched endlessly around us, a void without a horizon. There was no way back, no way forward. Only the truth slithering into my skull, rewriting my thoughts. This had happened before. It would happen again. The Sentinel wasn't a ship anymore. It was a doorway, and we had already stepped through. Somewhere in the distance, the radio crackled again. A voice, a distress signal. This is the Sentinel. We have discovered an anomaly, requesting immediate assistance. The transmission was mine. We weren't supposed to be here, but maybe we always were.